Salam alaikum. Welcome to Kunafa and Shay, a podcast produced for HowlRound Theatre Commons, a free and open platform for theatre makers worldwide. Kunafa and Shay discusses and analyzes contemporary and historical Middle Eastern and North African, or MENA, and Southwest Asian and North African, or SWANA, theatre from across the region.
I'm Marina.
And I'm Nabra.
And we're your hosts.
Our name, Kunafa and Shay, invites you into the discussion in the best way we know how, with complex and delicious sweets like kunafa and perfectly warm tea, or in Arabic, shay.
Kunafa and Shay is a place to share experiences, ideas, and sometimes to engage with our differences. In each country in the MENA or SWANA world, you'll find kunafa made differently. In that way, we also lean into the diversity, complexity, and robust flavors of MENA and SWANA theater. We bring our own perspectives, research, and special guests in order to start a dialogue and encourage further learning and discussion.
Welcome to the 5th season of Kunafa and Shay, where we delve into the dynamic world of performance art across the region. We're highlighting the creative, innovative, and artistic disruption of performance artists, exploring how their art serves as a powerful medium for expression and social change. This season features interviews with performance artists who challenge norms and use their craft to further conversations about topics like identity, diaspora, homeland, and futurity. Today, we'll be talking about feminist performance art with an amazing performing artist from Lebanon, Rima Najdi.
Rima has lived in Beirut, New York, and is now settled in Berlin. She speaks French in an Arabic accent, English in a French accent, and Arabic in a Lebanese accent. Even though Najdi is a modern-day polyglot, for some reason, she has difficulty finding the words to describe herself as an artist. The first time Rima felt she was a remarkable, exceptional, amazing, astonishing, astounding, marvelous, wonderful, incredible, unbelievable, phenomenal, outstanding, unusual performer was when she stepped off the airplane onto U.S. soil, where she was randomly selected for a security check. She knew she had to be attractive, considering this continued to be the case at JFK Airport. Najdi first felt influential when she was dancing on stage and her professor suddenly started to cry, though she learned shortly after that it was because of the breaking news that the Prime Minister of Lebanon had been assassinated. Regardless, the experience still encouraged, boosted, pumped, inflated her ego, and gave her the impression that she was destined to move people.
Najdi's work occupies and renegotiates in between spaces. She grapples with the ways in which identity is constructed and perceived, focusing on the lived experience of the body. She's interested in the vulnerability of the body in relation to the politicized tropes of gender, safety, mobility, and representation. She thinks it's much more interesting and rewarding to change a performance process live than to have everything memorized, regurgitated, restated, reiterated, recited, parroted. She would rather play, replay, re-replay, re-re-replay, re-re-re-replay, etc. It's lovely to have you here, Rima. Thank you so much for joining us.
Same here. I'm very happy to be with you.
So performance art is always very in the moment. It tends to be. So we wanted to start off by just hearing about what you're currently working on.
What I'm currently working on is it's a bit hard to currently work on anything, to be honest, because of the war and the massacres and everything that we are witnessing. And being a performance artist, it means, like, in many ways that you have to leave yourself vulnerable for most of life events, and especially when something is hitting hard at home, like in Palestine, but as well because my family comes from south of Lebanon, and my father is selfishly still residing there, but obviously it's very personal in many ways. But also being in Germany in all of these conditions makes me really wonder that like how to not only respond, but kind of like being completely in shock and freezing, like really thinking, like, how do we think about any future right now? Because Especially if I want to speak about performance art, a lot of it is because of the now, like you need to be present. And it's kind of how do we extend this presence? And now all of these now in my head, they're up for questions like what are we doing really? So yeah. So what I'm working on is pending, if you want, until we see what's gonna happen later. How do we survive? How do we what is the next future? Because yeah, like so it's been hard to be working or being active in an artwork or thinking about art under such conditions, to be honest.
Absolutely. And we're hearing that as well from so many of the folks that we're interviewing these days, from the region, of course. And there's so much to consider when it comes to response or what we're doing at this moment. I know so much of your work has responded to really intense political situations or questions. I'm thinking about your piece, Think Much, Cry Much, which was created after intensive research of borders. Could you maybe talk about that piece, and what that grew out of, how that grew out of the research that you did? I know it was a long 6 months of research. Uh, and what did that piece end up looking like?
Mhm. So when I say like 6 months of research, it means that this is like the budget that was planned for that. But when I talk, most of my work takes about like the longer pieces that I do. They take quite a lot of length of research. So we're talking 2 to 3 years actually. So with Think Much, Cry Much, I wanted to work about border crossing because or borders in general, because when we were during that period of time in 2015 and until this day, when we talk about borders, we're directly only speaking about refugees. And even though what's at play is much more, a much larger system, obviously. It's not only like state system, but we're talking about the media, we're talking about the workers who actually like come and put the fence. We're talking about the technology part. Uh, for example, especially at the EU, they developed this company called Frontex, and they were developing this weird kind of technology and robotics to go to the border and to stop the people from entering. And so when I talk about research, it meant, and the police, of course, that and the media. So when I during that research part, I met with a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, but also I tried to go and see to different countries. So the funders or the festivals that produce that work, I told them that I want them to create residencies for me in each place, and because they were all in Europe, so and all had a say, if you want, or a quota for refugees, and uh, so in each place I went to meet refugees or asylum seekers, but also I was like trying to meet with train drivers, with policemen, with people who put the fence on, or like the fence company. Or for example, like I was fascinated at that period with instructions, like how do you uh, how the system in a way create very minimal instructions. So for 6 months I've been like, wow, like following arrows, or at the airplane, like I would take all of these safety instructions and trying to understand safety for who, safety for what is the safety, like when they search you at the airport, the security measures, and like they always say it's for your safety. It's like I don't understand like why someone needs to touch me for my safety, or why do I have to empty everything for my safety? So uh, yeah, so this is what we're talking about research. And again, it means like during this research period, it's kind of like trying to be very attentive to the everyday. So when I'm going as well to visit the borders, it doesn't mean that like my work starts at the border. No, it means that all the way on the train, I'm trying to be attentive. Sometimes I'm just like filming nature or just looking at people. But also, yeah, it means that it's kind of like going all the way with the everyday of what happens and talking to people. And then from all of that, how do we create a script for a performance?
And so, what did that performance look like to give our listeners an idea?
hmm Uh, so it looked different each time, very different, because it depended on the audience. So the performance, when you arrive to the performance, you receive headphones and you receive instructions through the headphones. Each uh, yeah, it like the whole performance was written in a way that there are 8 channels. So by the end of it, or if you are sitting outside or standing outside, you would look at a choreography if you want. It's very simplistic one, so each channel is different than the other, but everyone goes through all the channels, and obviously like everyone figures out after the second time, like you start to realize that this people are doing what I was doing. And uh, at one moment, the performance, like each with the transition of each channel, there is a common choreography that everyone has to do it. And this is the only time where you hear not a refugee story, but you hear the conditions of what does it mean to be a refugee. So, in one time, like you hear about the kind of food or uh, the structure of where they're saying. So, I kind of tried to avoid as much as I could as well to be trying to represent refugees in this performance or, yeah, border stories, because I feel like there was a lot of that. And in many ways, in most of my work, not only in this work, I kind of don't feel at ease to represent many things, but to reproduce and find frictions. So it's not surprising for me most of the time that people don't really are not very satisfied. Like they say like, what was that? And for me, this is like, okay, I can work with that much better than yeah, just like to do this representation in general.
Well, and in one of the articles about this piece, um, someone wrote that you hand a slip of paper to people after that says, like, "This performance piece will not change your life." And I was wondering if you could talk more about
You
that.
know, especially with the like with the war now, or but let's focus on the refugee crisis, right? Uh, what happened during, especially with the media, I met with journalists and kind of during the research, and I tried to understand from them how they cover the stories and why certain borders, why certain stories, why all of that. And it's kind of like most of it, it's to try and make other people feel right, like this. That how horrible it is and how should be very humanistic with each other. And obviously I don't believe in this kind of solidarity, like this humanitarian solidarity, because I don't think it's it's real in many ways. uh, so I needed to be very clear that it's like, don't resume your guilt. If you come to attend a story about refugees, about borders, then you will understand what's happening. You will never understand what's happening because obviously you haven't been like into that experience. It's just like trying to make it closer to everyone to understand that the system that we all live in works with different people and different privileges in uh, different proximities maybe, or yeah. So in this way I didn't want for the audience to kind of like say, oh, I've been into this refugee performance. And it's like, this is wrong as a sentence. It's wrong for me. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and it touches on something Nabra and I talk about all the time, which is, like, we can't stand the humanizing narrative, and right now what's happening with the current genocide, I think proves that that's true, is people are like, "But Palestinians are humans too, and if you watch these stories on Instagram, like, your view will be changed," and it's still, like, going into month 8 of a genocide, so
Yeah,
clearly that
yeah,
narrative is not
exactly.
working.
Well,
Exactly.
it's also ridiculous, to have the point be blank are humans too. We talk about that a lot with especially kind of like earlier waves of art trying to just get to the basic, which isn't even the basic, it's before the basic. And so how can we have a more nuanced conversation if we're not even at that level with each other? Is something, yeah, that's something we've talked a lot about with, and a lot of artists have brought up, especially MENA and SWANA artists.
Yeah, yeah, total.
Another piece we wanted to talk about is Dress Me How You Like, which is how I first learned about you and got very excited about this piece. I think it's brilliant as a feminist and culturally informed art performance art piece. So, can you talk about that and where that idea came from, and also maybe where it's been performed? Because from what I understand, it's a piece that's gone around, and you are the center of that piece. So I know it's very mobile, so a little bit about its history as well.
Well, it's not very mobile, to be very honest. I think it was performed only twice, like in two different venues or three different venues. One of them is my home, uh, and that was like I think my second piece that I've ever done. Where did the idea came from? Hmm. I don't honestly remember very well, but I think it was very much related to moving from New York to Berlin and being in a drumming class and kind of like having to hear what an Arab woman should be. Uh, and I'm fascinated still with, like always, like also this may be response to your very first question, what are you working on next? With the Egyptian pop cinema and the personas that are created from there. I find they're like, it's like a gold mine that I keep going back to. So yeah, so that was the piece. It was like very, if you want, it happened quite quickly and it developed though. So first it was in 2012 that I submitted this, and I was much younger, obviously, so I was eager to just do and submit and try things and all of that. And so this is how it started. Like started learned how to sew through YouTube and was watching like a lot of videos and talking a lot about this idea, like or Western Hollywood movies, how they're portraying Arab women. So how a Western body, if you want, so wearing an Arabness, and what does that mean? And it's very obviously concluded like you need to be a harem or a belly dancer that is oppressed by men and society, or a terrorist. And as a terrorist, you don't belly dance, but mostly you do belly dance as an Arab woman. Uh, and I had a lot of fun with that. So I invite people to attend, and the group of people should be maximum 8, and each group will choose some garments, dress me, then make me pose, and then they take a photo for me, and then they would pose. They can dress up as well and come and stand and take a photo, like, so we're all inside the photo. And then what happens is that because the garments, they're all inspired by Hollywood movies, so obviously they're all Orientalists. And my whole idea is kind of like, once you corner, it's kind of like how the Hollywood movies corners us, and how the perception of because I've never realized that the perception of Arabness is that kind of informed only by Hollywood movies or stereotypes that much. Naive of me. But yeah.
After you're saying that afterwards, after they dress you, I think you were going to talk about what happens after that.
Right, it's kind of like cornering them. So it's kind of like talking back at any audience member who dares to come to such a performance. No, like it's kind of even that you don't say or you don't think of that, but it's kind of okay, let's play. But in that play, there's obviously like there's very clear positions that we're taking. You're gonna be dressing me again in Orientalist garments that look very tacky, and I love it because I did them. But yeah, but yeah, and and then I developed a lecture performance out of it as well, which is a lot of fun as well, because so I was kind of commenting on what had happened in the performance by creating this another layer of talking back, if you want, to the audience, but as well by simply analyzing the references that got me to this piece, and as well trying to understand these different positions of it's not only the audience at play, but myself as an Arab woman, so myself representing myself as the performance artist, so the object of the piece. So what happens within the object when someone is touching you weirdly inside the performance, when an Arab audience comes in as an like, okay, it's like, so all of these kind of encounters as well, what do they do, what do they produce in terms of an understanding, in terms of like an encounter just simply by talking or describing these encounters. And then I was invited again to perform it, I think 2019 in Prague. So we're talking 8 years apart. And obviously, I had grown a bit in 8 years. And I moved quite a lot of houses as well. So most of my things were gone to the streets. So I worked with the theater, National Theater of Prague, and I went to their own theater archive to fetch more costumes. And then it was a lot of more fun as well, the piece, because then we had different setups. I worked with Maria Kassab. We collaborated quite often, photographer and visual artist. And yeah, so we created like different kind of studio setups, and I had more budget, so I created more costumes as well, and the space was very big, so we could like really play quite a lot. And I changed the interaction a bit, so I had theater staff to sit with me in my tent, so when people arrive, there's already like people just like dressed up and sitting watching. And uh, and the costumes were more informed or more detailed in many ways, and the photos as well, they produced a better reproduction, kind of collage of different aesthetics, material, meanings. Yeah, it was a bit more informed. I think as well, it's much more related as well to my confidence in relation to the audience. So after one have practiced a bit, but because as well there is always the question, how do you rehearse such a performance? Like there's no way of rehearsing. You can imagine as much as you can. You can create your exit and entry strategies. You can do all of that. But there's something as well about like myself as a performer and how confident I became played a big role in my comfort and in receiving the audience and all of that. And
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I what you were just talking about, I love. So from 2012 to 19, you're talking about this shift in confidence. But I'm just curious, how has your work evolved over the years? Like, I think the confidence, I'm sure, is one thing, but from how you started, which maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you started doing this work, to where you are now, what do you think are the big evolutions in the work that you make?
well, evolutions. How to talk about that? I think because it's just like to learn how to work with other people. This is the biggest evolution that could happen. And still, I'm always learning. I've been very lucky to collaborate with brilliant people and artists.
Can you talk a little bit more about just how you started doing performance artwork? Like, did it evolve from a theater practice? I think that's how often people get started. But yeah, I'm just curious. We read your artistic bio earlier, which was beautiful, but it didn't have some of those sort of origin points. So we'd love to hear about that now.
So I studied theater at the Lebanese University in Lebanon, and which I'm very proud of course. mm, because it's a public university, and I think it's one of the best universities for theater when I was still studying there. Uh, uh, for theater in Lebanon, and uh, but when I was studying, I was like working at 10 different jobs, which I continued to do after I graduated. But so I was translating, I was a dancer, I was a stylist, and then art director, so set decorator, that means in the language we're using now. I was working at a coffee shop. I was assisting a photographer. I was producing. I was like visual editing for a Lebanese TV channel. So many things, and so that meant it's not only theater in a way that informed what I do now, but these many other elements as well. So to be on a music video pop song or to produce an advertisement, and the amount of work that it is happening uh, for 30-second, kind of like someone just drinking soda or whatever. Yeah. And it, didn't- it said that it didn't matter really what the project is. It's just like, okay, let's work, let's do things, let's make money because we need to live, etc. And studying theater in Lebanon as well, it meant that for most of everyone, it's like, what are you really doing? Like, really, because you really need to be stubborn, and you need to do many other things in order to be an artist in Lebanon, and unless you got it, like somehow you have the gate open to you. um, so yeah, this is my background, and then at one point I was kind of done from not from Lebanon, but I went into place growing up in Lebanon and spending maybe like 8 years in Beirut. It's like, okay, Beirut is a very tiny place, and I feel like I need to develop. And so I went to New York at the time, and I applied and did a master's degree at NYU Tisch, Performance Studies. And I was in a conflict with myself because I come from this practical background, and it's a theoretical program, and I didn't understand what does that mean. And then I understood. And also it meant that it's not the only thing that I didn't understand in the beginning as well. I want to mention this because I've been thinking a lot about it lately. It was the first time that I see a Lonely Planet guide for Israel. So that meant Israel is real, because up until that point I was like still like it's like I meet with Israelis and everything, and it's like no. And that kind of too big realization in many ways that were happening at that period of time, and it made a lot of conflict in me because I know how to do things, I don't know how to transform, like how to write a paper. So I had to learn, and I resisted a lot, but I had to learn the tough way, and I learned a lot. Such an interesting program, and in many ways, and how it teaches you criticality, right? But it took me years to figure that out. Actually, when I was there, I didn't figure it out. And while I was there, and because of the need that I need to produce, I can't be like just sitting reading and writing papers. Uh, So, and it happened that I met, or I was living in a loft for a Lebanese dancer, choreographer, and I think now he's a gardener, Makram Hamdan. And so I had this big loft in Bushwick. And this is Bushwick before, now it's like very yuppie. Uh, or so I discovered. I don't know. So someone told me. uh, and he had the idea of like, we have a big space and everything. Let's try to make a residency. So we make a monthly or no, it was Bushwick Open Studios actually. And he asked me like, do you want to participate? And we can do something. We open the loft and we make studios. And this is how I decided that it's like, okay, let's do smaller pieces. There's no theater. And this I was used to already from Lebanon, because at the Lebanese university, like conditions are very, very basic. People are creating the conditions all the time for themselves to be able to do the theater. So, so it was kind of okay. Let's try things out. And the first piece I did ever, it was called Passage. So where people come in blindfolded, and there's the different textures. There's live music in this very small room, and I'm guiding them through the different textures uh, inside the room.
I really appreciated how much video, there is of your work, available, and I don't see that a lot, especially from theater artists or people who do any type of live performance. Really, it can be difficult to do that, but a lot of the video itself is a piece of art. They're not just, the documentation from the back of the house, where you see the blurry people on stage or something like that, but really the video documentation is a piece of art, unto itself. So I wanted to ask you about that, and whether, how video plays a role in your work, and whether you always have kind of a video component, a live component, and photos when presenting a piece, or how you kind of think about that, multidisciplinary, way of presenting your ideas.
hmm So most of the time, video, because as well, like before we say that, I want to say thank you to my now, I think, friend and collaborator Anna Nieves, aka La Manchega, because we've been working quite a lot, and she's like my video person and friend that I'm always like working with, even though we don't live in the same city anymore, but we understand each other in many ways. And so even if uh, I'm making the video, but it's kind of like video and photos are a product, right? Like I'm always thinking about them as a product. And a lot of my way of looking at things is by how to, when I talk about reproduction or production, I mean, it's like, okay, so these kind of aesthetic, even though they're not intended, once they are in video or photo, they are a product by themselves. And what do they create then? So this is why most of my work is informed by videos, photos, and I kind of, in many ways, I let them create the aesthetic. So I'm more oriented towards a feeling, or like, okay, it's like, how do we make uh, uh, a photo that generates a product that can talk about what I'm trying to do. Even though a lot of times it doesn't happen, no? You end up with a video that doesn't have a good sound, or so. How do we then work with this video to do what it needs to do without that sound? Like, what are the alternatives? But video and photo in general, videos, they're a great source of inspiration as well for my personal self. So this is why I find it like a fascinating medium, even though I'm never a professional doing that. But I do as well my own video works that are very amateurish, if you want.
Well, I I hear everything you're saying, and I agree that like we can't capture everything in the video for sure. But I did feel very inspired watching the videos of your pieces. I also did want to participate in different ways, and so that's where I felt like, oh, okay, well, the video will never give me the chance to do that, but it did give me a taste. So I was really grateful for this archive that you've created of the work, especially because, like, as Nabra and I have talked about, and we were talking earlier with you about it is important to really have an archive of our MENA and SWANA art that's being made. Because like when I think of performance art, I always think of Marina Abramovic first, which is fine, great performance artist. But why our referent is this one person, as opposed to really having sort of a more capacious understanding of the different performance artists and the different concerns that are coming up with performance artists.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I'm happy that because sometimes I realize like maybe we didn't do enough, or maybe it wasn't good. So it's good to hear that this is how it is perceived. Like, yeah, cool.
Is there a certain, excuse me, message or theme or idea that connects to your pieces? Nabra and I were talking about them, and we were like, oh, these feel very feminist, but the word feminist can be loaded in different ways. And so I don't know if that's how you identify them, but we would love to hear you discuss, like, what is there something that sort of connects them all together?
Well, connects. Okay, so this question stays with me, because a lot of times that when you do something, you don't understand, or when I do something, I don't understand what I'm doing, or I think that I understand, and then years later, it's like, oh, yeah, then it makes sense, but that can change as well, right? Like it's never really uh, like something that is like fluid and brilliant and like, yeah, I like everything, and it doesn't happen that way. A lot of times I wished like, oh, I wish that I interacted differently or I did something different. But luckily I am a performance artist, so I can always go back and do whatever I want with it, right? And so what links everything together, I think, is like or what I think that I arrived, like this is my last conclusion. It's like how do we so how emotions have their physicality and how they interact, but it's not only emotions, it's as well stereotypes and emotions and violence, because I have like now I'm just like trying to track the different pieces, and like with each piece there is like, okay, I talk about violence and some of them, I talk about borders, I talk about gender, I talk about like my last piece, revolution and birth. And I'm very interested in what does that do to the body, and how do we articulate that, how does it choreograph the body, how does it uh, how do we sometimes like really embody these, let's say, like how do we embody the violence, and how does that make us not feel but express ourselves, and how can we then switch these moments by only expressing them, like how do we create a rupture in this general narrative by just putting it out loud. I'm not thinking about like what links them as feminist, because it's inherently like I'm a feminist, and feminism is obviously like very wide and in schools and spectrum. So it's like kind of like saying, talking about psychology, and I don't agree with all of the schools. So, and I don't have to. So, but it's just in that way. I'm not thinking that this should be a feminist performance or this should be a political performance or any of that. It's just because I am feminist and political and so on, then obviously the work is.
So we were chuckling because Rima has two children. We just heard one of them. Although in the background for me, we're hearing construction, so I think I would much rather hear the sounds of children. It's much more joyful. But oh, Rima, I loved so many of the things you just said, including, yeah, the work is feminist because I'm feminist, and so it's your feminist school of thought, not just whatever feminist school of thought, right? But also, you talked about rupturing a narrative, or narratives, and that I feel has been a theme for the things you've described, like oh, you think you understand borders? Actually, let's interrogate what you understand about borders, what we understand about them. Oh, you think that you understand Hollywood? Let's see what happens when you are the Hollywood producer who's getting to design the costumes and getting to be the photo at the photographer here, or the person who's posing you, I guess. As I feel like everything, and even you were just talking about motherhood, and oh, like what is birth? Like what does this do? And like reinterrogating this narrative that I think there's a common narrative of like, yes, and mothers give birth and then they have children. And yeah, what does that mean? So I really appreciate the way that you've talked about like rupturing these narratives, because I do think that when I think of your art as thought provoking, I'm like, that's what those thoughts are provoking is actually, what do I know about these things and how have I come to any of these conclusions at all?
That's great to hear. And then as well, like I want to add on it because it's like this total conception. Because when we're speaking about like revolution and birth, it's like, oh, birthing a revolution. Oh, revolution and the birth of an era. It's like, no, 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 no. It's something very personal, actually. It's something that you have to do with your body. It's not something that you have to perceive. And yeah, and or as well, like with borders and refugees. So yeah, totally. It's kind of like we have to do these things with our bodies. It's not something that you're only perceiving. And so how do we, and there's like when you talk about like for example revolution, everyone has a certain image, no? And or you talk about the war, it's always this kind of stereotype of an image, or Hollywood or Arab women or suicide bombers. Yeah, there's always like this kind of complete total perception. And yeah, I'm interested kind of at tweaking or rupturing or taking the piss really sometimes.
I love that.
Like with my bio. Yeah, exactly.
I love that we're ending with taking the piss because it's perfect. Thank you so much for joining us and for talking about all of your work. I really encourage everyone who's listening to check out Rima's website and actually look at the images and videos that have come out of that work, because you really can't capture everything just from describing it or even from seeing what's archived. So hopefully one day we'll be able to experience your work live. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'm very like emotional when you say these words.
Thank you so much, Rima.
This podcast is produced as a contribution to HowlRound Theatre Commons. You can find more episodes of Kunafa and Shay and other HowlRound podcasts by searching HowlRound wherever you find podcasts. If you loved this podcast, please post a rating and write a review on your platform of choice. This helps other people find us. You can also find a transcript for this episode, along with a lot of other progressive and disruptive content on the HowlRound.com website. Have an idea for an exciting podcast, essay, or TV event the theater community needs to hear? Visit HowlRound.com and contribute your ideas to the Commons.
Yalla, bye.